Hello world, Lisa Fredrickson, your friend and computer science professor with another short screencast welcoming you to Web 124 JavaScript II. I thought it would be good to just show you a few things that I want to make sure are solid before we get into the class. And that is basically the knowledge from Web 114 JavaScript 1 as well as Web 110 HTML and CSS that are prerequisites to this class. In computer science, the knowledge is very cumulative. So if you ever get into a class and it's got a prerequisite, you might want to come to the JCCC website. Let's take it from the top and look up the knowledge that you were supposed to learn in those prerequisite classes. So I'm at jccc.edu, the home page here. If we go into the menu and then we look into the catalog, that's the official listing of all the credit course descriptions. And I'm going to go into the W for web development and digital media. Here's a description of all of the web courses. And if you click these links on the right, let's go to Web 110, you'll see not only the description, but also all the objectives. Each of these objectives then is further described in the outline and competencies. So those are the things that you should have learned in that class. Look at Web 114, JavaScript 1. Here's the description, objectives, and again, the expansion of those objectives in the course outline and competency. However, instead of looking at the course objectives and official documentation, I thought I'd just go into the code and show you quickly some of the things that I want you to be solid on in JavaScript 1 before we get into JavaScript 2. And that is how to declare a variable and assign a value to it, how to work with the built-in objects of the window, document, and console objects, the difference between a property and a method, how to use a for loop, how to create a function, and how to run that function on an event. Those are some of the key things we've covered in Web 114. If we go over to the code that created this page, I've got some JavaScript here in a little embedded script right before the closing body tag so that all of our HTML and CSS is parsed before we get into the script. I want you to know how to use a variable declaration. You may have learned with var, the new terminology is let const, and given I'm declaring something from the document that's never going to change, I'm going to use the const keyword and assign the variable name JS, assign it to document.getElementById JS. That is this little list item. If I save this, I want to show you what this code does, so I'll comment it out, save and refresh my page. Notice that JavaScript terminology, that's the list item that has the ID of JS. And here's what I have as list item JS, the JavaScript terminology. And in the second statement, then I've used that variable name and used the class name property and assigned it to the word JavaScript. If I go up into my style sheet and if I look at the styles that the class JavaScript is given, then I can see that there's only one declaration here and it's color green. So as soon as I save that page and refresh it, those two statements have turned that list item green. And that's all we're doing in those two statements. One of the harder things from Web 114, JavaScript 1, is when you use the query selector all method. The ElementById method only returns one thing, but the query selector all method returns everything with a class of JavaScript. And that's the selector for a class attribute in your CSS. You know that classes in your CSS must be identified with the period. So when you get into the query selector all method, you have to use that same selector syntax as the argument that's fed into that query selector all method. Also, as soon as you grab something off the web page, in this case I'm saying let JavaScript list items be everything with a class equal to JavaScript. And that will be all of these items have a class equal to JavaScript. Anytime you assign a variable name to something from the web page, it's really nice to console log it out to make sure that that variable name contains what you wanted it to contain. I'm going to save and refresh my page and look into my console. And here on line 71, it's console logging out that list item. And I can see all the list items. And if I scroll down, I can see all the different list items as I scroll through this in the console. So I know that my JavaScript list items is a node list of 7 different list items. It's much like an array. And when we want to do something to all 7 of those items, we're going to have to use a for loop. So in this case, I'm letting I, my counter, assigning it to 0. I will stop my loop as soon as I is less than the length, which is going to be 7. I'm incrementing by 1. And for every node in that list item, look, I'm using array syntax here. So first time I'm going to be addressing JavaScript list item 0. I'm going to use the class list property and the add method and add a white background class to that item. And that's what's giving me the white background. If I look at the styles that are applied with the white background class, I see the background color is white, and I'm putting a 1M padding around all the items. And so that's why this section turns white and has the padding around all the text, because I'm adding a white background class to each one of these list items using this for loop. So that's typically how we want to apply styles, either by assigning a new class name or using the class list property and its add and remove methods to add and remove classes from an HTML element, which in turn then talks to the styles sheet and applies those appropriate declarations or styles. Another thing from Web 114, how to create a function and why we create a function. We create a function to protect this code. This statement, this one statement, is not going to run until the show Web 114 function runs. These statements just run as soon as the web page loads because they're not protected by a function name. This statement, however, is protected by a function name. So that statement's not going to run until I run this function. Now I could just run this function by executing it with the parentheses. I've decided to run that function when the click event occurs of the Web 114 button. Let's go look and see where the Web 114 button is. I'm going to double click that. It's going to highlight it. Here's my Web 114 button. I'm going to save it. So when this button is clicked, document.getElementById, Web 114 button, when it is clicked, we're listening for that click, and we're going to run the show Web 114 function. So let's look at our page. I'm going to refresh it. Here's my button, click, and then it shows this content because of this statement, document.getElementById. That's this entire div is ID'd Web 114. I'm going to address an inline style, the display property, and I'm going to set it to block so that it displays. Whereas before, Web 114, when I loaded this page, I had display none. So when I load the page, that display none makes the content with an ID of Web 114 invisible. But when I click the Web 114 button, I am running the show Web 114 function, and that is setting its style display property to blocked so that we can read that content. Last but not least, I'm going to show you one more event listener, and this event listener is going after your name. And let's find out what your name is. Your name is going to be this little input box here. I've got a label for your name, and then the input box itself is ID'd your name. So we're talking about that little input box right there. Document.getElementById, your name, is going to be this input box. We're listening for the blur event. The blur event is when you tab out of an input box. And then instead of a named function, I'm just using an anonymous function. I'm writing this function directly inside this event listener. Now, a lot of my Web 114 students did this. I don't care for this as well, because when you have an anonymous function that is tucked inside of this event listener as an argument, you can't reuse it. So I'd much rather have you pull this out. I'm going to call the function with the name alert name. I'd much rather have you have a function name there. I'm going to cut my function out and paste it here and call this function and give it a name instead of an anonymous function without a name. Call it alert name. So now I have that function pulled out of this add event listener method argument. I could reuse the alert name function elsewhere in my code if I wanted to. So I wanted to give you an example of how to pull it out, give it a name, and then you can reuse that function elsewhere in your code. Let's see what this statement is doing. is looking at your name, which we know is this input box. It's adding an event listener to the blur when I tab out, and it's running the alert name function. And all the alert name function is doing is creating a variable assigned to document.getElementById your name, its value. So whatever value I put in there, I'm going to put in Lisa, and it's alerting it, window.alert. We know that that's just a dialog box that's going to pop up. So let's see if we can run this function on the blur event as soon as I tab out. Let's refresh my page. Let's put my name into that input box. Let's tab out of the box, and there's my alert. And I'm going to click OK. So if you're solid on these things that I've been showing you, you are ready to go and rock and roll in Web 124 JavaScript 2. Thank you.